I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Yuwad and Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be watching today's episode.
In the beginning, it was really challenging. I had to learn how to be a mother without using drugs, which I had never done before. I had to learn how to be a woman in recovery. I had to learn how to be employable, to pay my bills, to be a wife, to be a friend. We tried to fix our relationship, but what we never did was try fixing ourselves. That actually I hadn't been arrested. I had been rescued from the hell and the darkness and the chaos that I had been living in.
Welcome to Shts Fcked, the podcast that gets real about addiction, mental health, and everything in between. I'm Paris, and I spent 17 years battling the bottle, 10 years hooked on meth, and I also did a stint in the escorting world, which nearly cost me everything, including my life. I was lost, disconnected, and completely unrecognizable from who I once was. With both lived and professional experience, including qualifications in alcohol and other drugs, I'm here to share what I've learned along the way. Shts Fcked isn't about offering the right way to recover. It's about showing that recovery is actually very personal. Every journey is unique, and this podcast brings you stories, insights, and practical tools to help you find what works for you. Now, just a disclaimer, we dive into some tough topics here, including addiction, all forms of abuse, trauma, mental illness, suicide, self-harm, and the realities of life in recovery. These discussions can be intense, so please take care while listening and just make sure you're in the right headspace too. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast. Your support actually helps us more than you know, and it's one of the best ways to keep these conversations going. I hope you enjoy the show. And welcome to the show, Sonya Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I appreciate it so much. And whereabouts in the US are you currently?
I am in sunny Sarasota, Florida. Actually, right now it's nighttime, so it's not sunny, but it's usually very sunny here and very hot, right in the southern tip of Florida.
Nice. And I mean, I'm over here in Perth, WA, very much. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm looking out and it's so overcast. It's not very sunny at all, but it's morning. So, very different time zones, come into play here. It's actually taken us a hot minute to get this together because of the damn time zones. I'm talking to you from the future. Like, it's Sunday morning and it's Saturday night for you.
That's so cool. That's true. It is.
Yeah. So can you share with us the journey that led to your battle with addictions and how it impacted your life and your family? So obviously it's kind of hard to go into everything, but summarize it the best that you can. Just kind of touch on a few things and fire away.
Absolutely. My journey into addiction, I always like to tell people that it started with trauma for me. And I think it's really important for people to understand that, because when I started using drugs, I never intended on becoming falling into an addiction. I didn't think it would happen to me. What I didn't know is that everybody in my family was either an addict or an alcoholic. And the age that I started using really left me in good condition to become an addict. And so when I started using drugs, it was a way to cope with pain and kind of numb my feelings and to feel like I could become this person that I wanted to be, because really deep down inside, I didn't feel like a very good person and I didn't have a lot of self-worth because I had went through a lot of trauma. And so just to kind of summarize that, from the time that I was 11 years old, which is when I put the first substance in my body, until the time that I was 21 years old, I went through just a series of one traumatic event after another, starting with being sexually abused and then getting into a relationship because, being sexually abused, what I know now is like it led into a pattern of life for me of searching for like validation from others. And so I got into a relationship with somebody, got me pregnant. I wound up losing the baby. And then he passed away very shortly after. He was the first person that I ever knew to overdose. And that was back in 2003.
Mm.
And so right after that, I got into another relationship, and that turned out to be a very abusive relationship. It didn't start out in the beginning to be an abusive relationship, who, by the way, that guy has also passed away. But in the beginning, it was everything that I ever wanted. And then it eventually turned into physical abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. There's a lot of different types of abuse. And so it didn't start out as, just this crazy asshole. It started out as everything that I ever thought I wanted handed to me on a silver platter, which I now know to be love bombing. And if you don't know about
Mm.
trauma bond, you may want to go research it, because that's what it was. And so when I found substances, right, that was the answer to my problems. Like, it made the pain go away. It made me like come out of my shell. And it was the great deception. It gave me a sense of freedom and belonging. But very quickly, I became a slave to my addiction. And then it was a very long time after that before things would ever be different, because it was the only coping skill that I ever had, because I went through trauma at a younger age. So when I started using, like, I didn't know about like calling a friend or a breathing exercise or practicing the pause or meditation or nothing, right? Like, the
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
coping skill that I had was to use. And so that led me down a very dark path for a long time. And when I finally figured out that I was an addict, it was too late at that point in time. Like, I was already too deep into it, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And so that led me, into losing my kids, and to destroying my health and disrespecting my body and ruining my marriage and destroying every relationship that I had and stealing from my family members and going to jail. And I mean, you name it, like, it didn't really matter what happened, because I didn't know how to get out of it. And so when you're in that kind of lifestyle, it's like part of the game. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, these
Yeah.
are the things that are expected to happen. We know it's going to happen, but we don't know how to do anything about it. And so it's just a life that I thought I was destined to live. And I thought that I would destined to die that way as well.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I like that you have really emphasized on the fact that, your addiction was born from trauma, because, a lot of people, it's starting to be talked about a lot more. And I mean, I'm not going to say every single addiction is born from trauma. I mean, it does come from peer pressure as well. But I think that trauma is a leading cause. It's absolutely a leading cause. And you're right. Like, we use it as a coping mechanism to take away the pain. Like, especially when you've been going through so much at such a young age, and you weren't given the tools and the knowledge on how to navigate all those big emotions. It's so easy to fall into that trap. And I find it really hard when people say, addiction's a choice. Like, how do you feel when people say that?
It actually makes me very frustrated, to be honest with you, because it's hard for somebody to understand unless you've actually been there
Yes, I
before.
agree.
So unless you've been the person using drugs, like, you're right, it was a choice. The first time that I drank with my friends when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, those were choices that I made.
Mm.
But I did not know the consequences of my actions at that time.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, just about everybody drinks or smokes cigarettes or tries a joint for the first time with their friends, but only a select few of us then later become addicted to it and can't stop, even though we want to.
Yeah, and that's the whole definition of addiction, right? Is not being able to stop a behavior even though there's harmful consequences. It's so hard, but like I've got to say, like, I'm so proud of you to just see like where you are today, and I'm excited to talk more into your journey and what you've been getting up to. So you mentioned you were kind of in this space for quite some time. So I kind of want to take us back 5 years ago. So can you share with us what you were experiencing during this time?
Yes, and I'm so glad we're going back 5 years ago because we're gonna skip a lot of just straight up chaos, right? I mean, if you've ever lived it, like, you know the chaos. I
Yeah, we
had
don't need
gotten
to
to
get
a
into
point where
it.
yeah. I mean, I had gotten into a point where I had lost custody of my kids. I was running with a warrant for my arrest because I had been arrested on multiple felonies. And every time they would let me out of jail, they would say the same thing to me, like, just don't use and you won't come back here. Well, guess what? I didn't know how to not do that. And so I would go back to using. And then on this particular time, 5 years ago, actually a little over 5 years now, I was running with a warrant for my arrest. I was navigating. Well, I wasn't really navigating because I was running. So I had an open DCF, stands for Department of Children and Families, widely known as Child Protective Services. I had a case plan for my kids, and I was running from that. I was running from the law. Nobody wanted me anywhere around them. Like, I wasn't allowed to go over to my mom's house. If I did go over there for a brief moment to maybe take a shower or whatever I manipulated her into, she would hide her car keys in her pocket, put her purse in the car with the car locked so that I couldn't get into her purse when I came over because I was really sneaky. And anytime that I come over, I would come over to steal or to,
Mm,
get something because that was just my MO back then. That was what I was trying to do. And not that I wanted to hurt people, but that's just what my addiction had led me into. And so, my husband was estranged from me because he had recently almost just passed away from having endocarditis, narrowly survived that, but then wound up going to jail after. That tore us apart. And so I was out there by myself and I was living in a shed behind, well, I don't know if they call it this in Australia, but a trap house,
oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's okay, they do. Okay, so you know what a trap house is.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I was living in a shed behind a trap house and there was no running water, there was no food, there was no toilet, there was no shower, there was no there was nothing. It was literally just the dope in the shed. And I used to go pee in a little ramen noodle cup, like those little disposable ramen noodle cups. And then I would carry it outside every day or two, but I was too scared to actually open the door and look outside because I knew the cops were after me. And so I was just in a complete place of insanity.
Mm,
And every day when I was living in that shed, I knew that I was going to jail. I mean, I knew it was going to happen. I had a warrant for my arrest. It was only a matter of time before I got caught. And quite honestly, I feel like I had gotten to a place where I was ready, but I didn't know how to do it.
right.
And so I was just like tired of living in the mess and tired of living in the shame. And I wanted something different, but I didn't know how to have anything different. And so every day when I was in that shed, for the last several months, I would say to myself, tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to go to rehab. I'm going to check myself into detox and I'm going to go to rehab. And then I would use that night and I'd wake up the next morning and I'd say, oh, just one more. And then
Mm,
I go to rehab. And it was just that cycle every day. Like I continued to use, even though I didn't want to use anymore. Like I wanted to stop. I wanted to get my kids back because I knew I only had a limited amount of time. I wanted to not, go to jail. Like I wanted to not have the consequences.
mm,
And it wasn't even fun anymore. You know what I mean? Like I
yeah.
wasn't having fun. I was just using to stay well, right? I would call it getting well. And I just didn't enjoy it, but I didn't know how to get out of there. And so today is actually, and I don't know when this will be aired, but it's International Overdose Awareness Day. And so the day before I got arrested, I had overdosed and I fell out on the floor. I was down there for about 6 hours or so.
Oh,
And the
wow.
person that I was in the shed with was a drug dealer, right? That's who I was living in that little shed with. And he just let me lay there. Like he wasn't going to save me. He wasn't going to Narcan me. Truly, like by the grace of God, that's the reason that I'm alive today because by all rights, should not be here. And so what happened is that I woke up the next morning, like I fell out somewhere around 10 o'clock at night. And I woke up the next morning, laying on the floor, like slumped over. My legs were asleep. Like I was knotted out, folded in
Mm.
half. And I woke up that way the next morning to a knock at the door. And the knock was the sheriff's department coming to pick me up because my mom had found out where I was at in that shed. And she had called what we call here Crime Stoppers to report me on my felony warrants and to get me to safety because she was terrified for my
Of
life. And
course.
so that's where I was at a little over 5 years ago today.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Like, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I mean, good on your mom as well for, making that tough call to call you in, because that wouldn't have been easy for her, I can imagine.
No, not at all. And you have to think. So, I actually, when I lost custody of my kids, although I had started this like case plan a few months prior to that moment in the shed, my mom had actually taken my kids for me several years before that. And
Right.
so they were with her. And so she's taking care of my kids. I'm her only daughter. I'm an only child. And so her only child is out there, wandering the streets, sleeping around, like, risking her life every night. So she was terrified for me,
Mm.
and rightfully so. And so I was very upset with her when I first got to jail and I learned that she had turned me into Crime Stoppers because the cop that arrested me told me about it on the way to the jail. Um, but now when I look back on that, like that move saved my life. I maybe wouldn't be here if she didn't do that because the night before I got arrested, I almost died. So
Mm.
how do I know that if it would have been one more day that I would
Yeah.
still be here right now?
Yeah. And so when you went into jail, like, how long were you in jail for?
So I sat in jail a few months, and the first few weeks that I was in jail, it was so bad. Like
Mm.
I had to detox off of
Oh,
some really awful drugs. And I sat in this place in the jail that they call medical. So I don't know if they have like a medical thing there, but and this is all over the place, right? When people come in addicted to drugs, they put them in a safe place to come off of the drugs because coming off of drugs can be very dangerous. And
mm.
so they didn't know what I was coming off of, but I was coming off a lot of stuff. So I went into this place called medical and they put you in this essentially like a glass box so that you're
Right.
being directly observed 24 hours a day in case you go into a seizure or in case something bad happens. And so I sat in medical for several days until I finally started to turn a corner. And then they took me into the general population area. And then eventually I went into a place called the recovery pod. And I spent a little time in the recovery pod long enough for me to get a sense of clarity and to finally understand that I was right where I was supposed to be,
Mm.
and I had been to jail many other times prior to that, but something was different this time. Like I said, when I was in that shed, I was tired of it. Like I didn't want to keep using. I wanted to get help, but I couldn't.
Mm.
And so I was using against my own will. And I realized while I was in that jail cell that actually I hadn't been arrested. I had been rescued from the hell and the darkness and the chaos that I had been living in. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. It was looking like I was going to prison. They were offering me 20 and a half months in prison, but I knew that I was where I was supposed to be. And I don't know how to explain that other than just a feeling of peace, knowing that I was supposed to be there at that moment, no matter what was to happen next. And I remember being in there for the first time in my life, like laughing more than I had ever laughed in years
Mm.
and feeling more free than I had ever felt in my life. And it's so ironic because I was like locked down, being counted every day, being told what to eat and where to go and how to act, and like all the
Like,
things,
no
right?
freedom.
Yes. But I knew that I was experiencing like freedom from active addiction. And
Yes.
so I didn't have to wonder who I was going to screw that night to have dope the next morning or how much of my shot I could save to get well the next morning. I didn't have to worry about any of that. And that was so freeing. And another thing too is sitting in the recovery pod, there were other people like me. And I always thought that I was very much unique in the way that my addiction had led me into doing things that I thought nobody did.
Yeah.
But what I found is that there was a lot of people like me, and I wasn't that unique. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I found a place that I belonged. And so being in jail for that time period was the best thing ever. And I still go back to that jail like all the time. So it holds a very special place in my heart.
That's so beautiful. And I love that, this particular jail had such a setup that was, able to support someone going through addiction, because I don't know if we have a lot of that in Australia. Like, I know a lot of people who battle addictions usually are raw dogging it in general population. Like, I don't know if there's much of a, sectioned off areas for people, who need recovery. I think that's something we're really lacking. And I can imagine probably in the US, not every single jail has that either. Yeah. So it's really good that you obviously ended up in this particular place at that particular time and you got that assistance that you so desperately needed. It's funny how the universe works, because I completely understand that sense of, knowing that you've got like this slice of peace, like, your chaos has suddenly stopped and now you're like, okay, I can actually start looking at what's going on here. Like you really start to connect back to yourself, and it's a wild moment. Like, it's really hard to describe. Like, it's hard to describe that feeling. But, I even went through very similar things. Like, I mean, I didn't go to jail or anything, but, I found when I got to a point of just absolute desperation, I ended up in psych wards. And even though I wouldn't say I fully turned around at that point, it was like starting to shift because I was able to get removed from that environment. And then I finally decided at another lower point to come back to WA because I was living in Victoria. And WA was a place I never wanted to go to. Like, that was my home roots. I left there for a reason. I was very much running away from stuff. I never really wanted to go back. But when I did get back, it was COVID time and I had to be in quarantine for 14 days. So I was coming down like a motherfucker by myself for 14 days. And I was like, this is exactly where I need to be.
See, like any normal person, like that makes absolutely no sense, but I get you. Like I am on the same page.
Honestly, it was such a turning point. I was like, I could have easily been like, this is shit. But even I had so many community workers calling in and checking on me, and they're like, you're so like good to talk to. You're so upbeat. And I was like, just things have finally, settled down, and I don't have to deal with all this fucking fucked up shit. Yeah, I got you. Oh gosh. So how did you and your husband start your journey to sobriety, and what were the biggest challenges you faced together? Like, how did you support each other through recovery? Because that's tough when you've got two people battling an addiction, and then, did you guys go on the journey of recovery at the same time, or was it different times? How did that work?
Yes, that's such a great question, because I think what we did before, right? I've been married for 15 years. We're coming up on 16 years married in
Congrats.
January. Thank you. And then 21 years or so together.
Oh.
And so for so many years, we tried to fix each other. We tried to fix our relationship, but what we never did was try fixing ourselves. And until we were able to fix ourselves, we could have never made it work. And again, this is another one of those, it was just meant to be the way that it happened, because after he got endocarditis and started to get better, he went to the hospital and he went through his journey to recovery, which went relapse, rehab, jail, relapse, rehab, jail. And he needed those things, right? Just like what you were saying a minute ago. I mean, sometimes it takes what it takes for us to finally surrender and to be ready to recover. And it took him several times to be ready to recover. And during that time is when I was meeting my lowest rock bottom, so to speak. But I actually got an opportunity to go to rehab instead of going to prison. I was supposed to sign for 20 and a half months in prison. And literally the day of court, I walked in court to sign for prison, and I had somebody show up there for me that brought meetings into the jail, and she advocated for me to go to treatment. And so
Oh,
I got to go to
awesome.
rehab instead of prison. And that was amazing. I mean, that turned the hope that I had into willingness, and I was willing to do anything I needed to do. With or without him, I was going to do it.
Yeah.
But he also got out of jail. Strangely enough, like the judge actually let him out of jail without sending him to rehab this time, around the same time that I was in rehab. And so he came to see me while I was in treatment. And remember, like, both of these children are ours, and we both have a case plan that we have to work if we're going to get our kids back. And so he came to see me in treatment, and we had made a decision that we wanted to be together because we had done some really ratchet stuff to each other prior to that. So we had made a decision that we wanted to let the past go and to be together and to get our kids back. But we knew if we were going to do that, that we had to kind of take a pause or continue to take a pause on each other and work on ourselves first. And so what that meant for us is like, I work my program of recovery. He works his program of recovery. When I got out of rehab, I went to a women's sober living house, and he went into a men's sober living house. And we stayed there long enough to get our feet underneath us and to start to build a foundation and to work our case plan. And we stayed there until literally the last moment that we could. In the United States, you only have 12 months by federal statutes to work a case plan before they want to change the goal to adoption or some other permanency option. And so we were at that 12-month mark. And so we either had to move back in together in order to get reunified, or something was going to happen to our kids. And so we had to make a decision. Okay, I guess this is the time, right? Like this, it's leading us to believe this is the time for us to come back together. And so around that time, we both had about a little under a year in recovery. And so we saved up enough money to get an apartment and move back in together. And then COVID happened. COVID, dang COVID. But yeah. And then actually, so the school got shut down, right? And so our kids were going to start like doing overnights and then transitioning back home. But they're like, nope, you just take them. Everything's fine. We're quarantined. Nobody can leave anywhere. Everybody's got to be in their home. So they came home very quickly, and then we were reunified within 2 months. And so even today, right? Like in the beginning, and I want to say this too, because in the beginning, it was really challenging. I had to learn how to be a mother without using drugs, which I had never done before. I had to learn how to be a woman in recovery. I had to learn how to be employable, to pay my bills, to be a wife, to be a friend. I had to learn how to be the person that I had set out to be with all of these other factors and responsibilities. And so it was a lot in the beginning. But because I had built that foundation and had my women and he had his men, we were able to take it one step at a time, and still even today, I work my program, he works his program, and we don't interfere with each other's recovery because that's never worked for us in the past. We do work the same program of recovery, but I stick to my support network and he sticks to his support network. And then we work on our marriage together, and on our family together. And so that's really what's worked for us. Not to say that it couldn't work for somebody else a different way, but that's the only thing that we found that was working for us.
Thank you so much for sharing, because I find that so valuable as well, because the amount of people that even come through the podcast who've had a lot of struggles trying to get sober, and they're in a relationship with someone who is also battling addiction. Like it's so tough, especially when you're at very different stages. One might not even be interested in recovering, but you still had that love for that person as well. So it's really beautiful that you guys were able to, you obviously saw what you wanted. Like you guys knew how much you loved each other. You wanted to be together. Like that was like in stone. Like you guys both knew that. So you put in the work, which is just amazing. Like, it's not easy to do. Like, so you guys should be so fucking proud. Like, that takes so much strength to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I also find, it's really valuable that you guys recognize that focusing on your own recovery as well as not like kind of blending it together and making it like a we are recovering situation, I think is the best way to go about it. Because if you start getting too focused on someone else's recovery, and I see this all the time, just even in other support groups where people are getting impacted by someone else's decisions around their recovery, and then are not focusing on themselves and how they're feeling towards their own recovery, that can set you back. So yeah, I think it's much more powerful to be doing that on your own. And then of course, like, being able to work on your marriage and your family like together, but I think recovery is such an individual journey. I really do believe that.
Yeah. He doesn't want me to tell him how to work his program because I do mine much better. So it is very individual. And that's exactly why I don't get involved in his business.
It's true, though. It's so true.
But who's to say he doesn't think his is better? You know what I mean? So we just, yeah.
We just avoid that conversation.
Yeah.
So in, I guess, the steps of regaining custody of your children, like you were able to reunite with them, you said within like 2 months, that's fairly quick, would you say? No? Yeah.
Well, it wasn't exactly 2 months. But so what the transition for them to come home happened in 2 months.
Okay,
And that is very quick because usually what they do is they start with like unsupervised visits, and then you have an overnight visit, and then you start transitioning where they'll come home like 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week, and then 4 days a week, and then they come home all the way. Well, in our situation, once we got to that unsupervised visits place, they're like, okay, they could just come home. So there wasn't like a transitional time. And, maybe it was meant to be that way. Like, I believe everything happens exactly the way that it's supposed to. As long as I do the next right thing, then things fall in line the way that they're meant to be. But, the steps that we had to take in order to get reunified. So initially, when it first happened, when the actual like removal happened, which was kind of weird because we weren't even living there when it happened. They were living with my mom. But anyways, that's a whole nother story. So we had to like do drug classes and parenting classes and do drug screens for the case manager and like let them come visit us, and then like have stable employment, stable housing, and you only get 12 months to do that. And so to a regular person, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But to somebody who's got mental health challenges, substance use challenges, like has no job and no place to live, like no financial means to do any of this, that is a really big deal. Like, you're asking them to change their entire life in a very short period of time. And so yeah. And I see this like all the time, which we can kind of get into that later. But, so I went to jail right after the case plan. Like it actually was a couple months into the case plan. I don't know. I spent a few months in jail and it delayed me starting the case plan.
Right.
And then I went to rehab, and then I got out and went to sober living. And so while I was in rehab, I was able to get the services there. So I got the parenting classes, I got the substance use classes. And then when I got out, all I had to do was maintain stable employment and then find a place to live. And by the way, I'm a convicted felon. I had poor credit at the time, and I had 6 evictions in my name. So finding a place to live, that was a whole separate task that was very difficult as well. So there's just a lot of challenges, when you're navigating through a case plan. And the most important thing in the world is what's on the line. And so, it was a lot. It was a lot. But, thankfully, like, it just happened the way that it was supposed to happen, that all of the pieces fell in line right when they were supposed to. And then we got reunified actually on Zoom court. We were virtual on court with the judge. And in the beginning, I always like to just let people know, like, it was hard. It was really hard. Like I you would think to yourself that, yay, you made it. You've been reunified. Life is great. You're so happy. You're so proud of yourself. And you are all of those things. And all of that is true. And what's also true is that I'm 9 months in recovery. So I'm newly sober. And all of the things I mentioned a few minutes ago about learning how to be responsible, I've also got that on my plate. And I've got kids who've been through trauma, myself who's been through trauma. And now I'm trying to heal everything and maintain stability and all of these things. So it was a lot on my plate. And the kids were mad at me, and rightfully so, right? I had to accept responsibility for my actions, and I had to allow them to walk through the journey of learning to trust me again. And I don't even know if I should say rebuilding a relationship, but kind of forging a new relationship with them
Yeah.
to let them get to know who I am and to get to know who they are and to reconnect. And oh my gosh, it was just so much. But I'm happy to say that it's been almost 5 years now. It's been about a little over 4 years now that they've been home, and things are dramatically different than they were in the beginning. But it was just really challenging then. Things are amazing today. I mean, of course, life still has its challenges, but it's been a journey. So here we are.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, like, I mean, I guess there's so much to unpack there, and especially, with your children having to learn that you're a safe person again, and just you trying to navigate recovery and just the challenges that come with that alone while transitioning out of, incarceration back into society, and, the challenges that come with finding rentals and jobs. Like, it is a lot. Like, it is a lot, but like, wow, just to see how much resilience and strength that you have to have moved through all of that and to be in the place that you are today. I think, there's so many people that would be out there listening to this who will hear it and know that, yeah, it's going to be tough, but you can do it. Like, if you persevere, you keep hope, and you keep doing the right things, you keep working on yourself, you keep putting in that maintenance and that work, you'll get there.
That's exactly right. And, I just want to say real quick, in the beginning, if I would have thought to myself, I have to do this, 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 and that in order to get where I want to go, and this is what it's going to look like when I get there, that thought alone would have been enough to just send me right on over the edge, but what we need to do is just focus on the next step in front of us,
Yes.
and that's how I did it, is just what's the next thing that we have to do? What's the next right thing in this situation? And that's still how we do it today, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Like, I mean, it can be very overwhelming if we try to think about everything that needs to be done or achieved all at once. But yeah, taking it day by day, step by step, just breaking those things down, it makes it a lot more manageable and easier to move through. Alrighty, time to give a shout out to our amazing sponsor, Equine Assisted Wellbeing Institute, which was founded by Felicity Rideout. Felicity is all about teaching others to become equine assisted therapy practitioners, which is a powerful approach that uses horses to help people heal emotionally and mentally. Now, if you're someone who's passionate about horses and you want to make a career out of it, then listen up. They've just launched their Equine Assisted Therapy Practitioner Training and Certification course, which is now available online and accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. Even if you haven't studied in years or tech isn't your thing, this course is designed to be super easy to follow. You'll get interactive modules, live coaching, unlimited support, and even a business startup kit to help you hit the ground running. Complete the course in as little as 8 to 12 weeks, or you can take your time because you've got up to a year to finish. But the best part is you can snag 10% off by using the code PARIS10 at checkout. And if you'd rather study in person, they do have an option for that too, and they're based in the beautiful Swan Valley in Western Australia. If you're feeling the call, jump on this opportunity to turn your love for horses into a rewarding career. Head to their website, www.equineassistedwellbeinginstitute.com, and sign up today. So you mentioned to me previously that you're now involved with, do I say NAMI? Is that how I say it?
Yes, You said it right.
Hey! So the National Alliance Mental Illness. What has your experience been like working with them over the past few years?
Well, I have to say that I love my job so much. It's crazy because I never thought that I would find to be honest with you, I was never really had it in my mind that I was going to go after a career. Like I just didn't see that for myself.
Right. Yeah.
But, I'm glad that it worked out this way. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine reached out to me from recovery, and she knew that going through the child welfare system was a part of my story. And so she told me about this program that they're creating, and she wanted me to be a part of it. And I just remember when I first read it, like I started crying because I just couldn't believe that they really had something like this out there for parents. Or shall I say, we were getting ready to create something like this for parents, because when I was going through the system, like as hard as I was trying and as much as I was doing, everybody was pointing the finger and telling me all the things I was doing wrong. And it was very stigmatizing, and I felt judged. I felt looked down on. Like I felt like a little itty bitty piece of crap, So it was really hard to get through it on my own. And I was just so grateful to know that I could be a part of something that's so meaningful to me. And so NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and it's the largest grassroots peer-led mental health organization in the nation, United States. And what's really cool about it is that it's not clinical. So every single person that works at NAMI has lived experience with something, meaning that they have navigated through some sort of challenges in their life and they've made it to the other side. And as I said before, like that doesn't mean we're perfect, right? Life still shows up, stuff still happens, but we've learned coping skills and we want to help others. And so the program that I am working in is called Parents for Parents, and we help parents navigate through the child welfare system. And what makes NAMI so special about that is that peer support is what we do. And so being able to apply that work into the Parents for Parents program has just been absolutely amazing. The training, the support, the education, the advocacy opportunities, the systems change, like it's all just such an amazing opportunity to be a part of. And I've been doing this for 2 years now, and I still feel like I'm brand new because every time that we do something, there's like the next really big, exciting thing to do. And on top of that, like the parents that I've gotten to work with over the years and the reunifications that I've seen and the children that have been born and the families that have come back together and the perspectives of the system professionals, I've seen them change their perspectives. I've seen them want to work with us. I've seen changes happen. Like just to see and witness all of this stuff. Don't mind my husband that just walked by if you heard that. But just to see like how much has changed in 2 years, like how powerful it is. And I'm not saying this about myself, so don't take this the wrong way, but how powerful it is to put somebody with lived experience into these different spaces, whether that be the child welfare system or the behavioral health system or the medical system or the school system or the jails or wherever they are. It is so powerful to have somebody with lived experience there. In my opinion, the peer specialist, peer supporter, or the person with lived experience fills the gap, right, between the services that are being offered and the individual. I kind of think of myself as like the in between. Like I'm there with the parent in between the first parenting class and the second parenting class, or the first court hearing and the second court hearing, like I'm there to help them navigate through the process and debrief all the stuff that's going on in their mind and be a sounding board or be the person they yell at. Like that's okay too. Like I'm just there to support them and give to them what I so desperately needed when I was going through it.
That's incredible. And I love that this organization's so focused on lived experience, because even in Australia, we're really starting to recognize the power of that, because there's so many people that can be working in community services, and it's no diss to them, no disregard at all, who've done like the training and been educated in these areas, but without that lived experience, I did still find, even when I was navigating the system as an addict, just in general, there was still a lot of stigma. There was still a lot of judgment. People didn't really know how to respond or even know how to properly navigate around this person or to help them in the best way. Yeah, I think it's so, so good that I guess there's this shift that's starting to happen now, that's been more recognized. And, for ages as well, like I always wanted to get into like whether it was mental health or addiction, and doing something in the line of that work. But like, you know, people would look at my like my history, and I would be very open. I'd be like, you know, I do have lived experience. I can help out in this space. And I was often turned down because of that.
Mhm.
Because of my lived
It's so
experience.
funny. And that's what qualifies you. It actually makes you so
I
special.
know.
Like you are, that's even better, like to have lived experience and the education and training that goes
Yes.
with it. I mean, that's like the best combination ever.
Exactly. But now, like, I'm starting to get a couple more, like, or just starting to see a shift in the response to when I do apply for jobs, because it's now becoming such a bigger understanding that we need more people with lived experience in these spaces. So that's incredible that this organization has really, really honed in on that. Like, how long has NAMI been around for? Do you know?
I do know, actually. Interestingly enough, NAMI has been around for over 50
Oh,
years.
wow.
However, what they have done, and it has been lived experience, but it started off as support groups for people who were experiencing mental health challenges or family members who had somebody who was experiencing a mental health challenge. So it started off as just like support groups, education, classes, advocacy for better legislation around mental health. And then it's turned into this just like peer movement. So
Mm.
it's really, transformed.
That's amazing. It's just so, yeah, so fucking good. And I love that that's starting to, would you say there's been many other places as well in America that are starting to shift that focus?
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
good.
It's becoming widely recognized. I do believe that we're still on like the precipice of this. We're still in the very beginning
Definitely.
stages. And there's going to be like a lot more, like this peer support movement is becoming very recognized. And I think people are really starting to see the value of it. And so I hope that there will be a lot more peers everywhere because there's room for us in all of these spaces, And something that you said before, and I just want to comment on, I think the problem with, and you're right, like there is a space for the people who have been to college and gotten a bachelor's degree or a master's degree
Mm.
in whatever they specialize in. But the problem that I see is a lot of times when you go and you get a master, whatever, I'm not even going to qualify that. But when you are working with somebody and you have learned that this is what they need to be fixed, right? Like this is what the treatment plan needs to be, so to speak, and it doesn't work out for them,
Mm.
well, then who's the problem, right? Is it the
Mm.
treatment plan? Is it the person providing the service? No, it's always the individual receiving the service. Like they're broken. They didn't engage well enough. They didn't want it, like whatever it is. And oftentimes it's not that. It's just like we were talking about earlier. It's not very prescriptive. Like you can't fix somebody. You need to
Mm.
let people learn to speak for themselves and empower them to make their own choices and then follow them on their path and then offer your special skills or training or education.
Yeah.
But I believe everybody should be in the driver's seat.
For sure. And that's a massive thing that I would say we're shifting focus in Australia for. So we're really looking at changing our models, like, making it more community based as well and more holistic. So ensuring that when we're giving those clients like dignity of risk. So that means, they have complete choice in their treatment. So, you're kind of meeting them exactly where they're at. You're not really telling them you need to do this or like you have to get sober or blah, 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 blah. Like it's meeting where they're at, looking at, what are their goals? What do they want out of life? What are they wanting to achieve? And then putting a plan together that works with their strengths, and what they want. Like rather than someone else being like, yeah, you got to do this, you got to do that. And if they don't want abstinence, that's cool too. Like, harm reduction, teach them about harm reduction, make sure that they're at least being safe and you're educating them around that. So it's like, just really making them responsible for their own treatment. And then you can guide them through it. But yeah, we went a little bit off topic then.
Well, I will say, I think Australia is ahead of us in that way. So
Okay.
that's really cool. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's a big focus. Like even when I did my studies in the last year in AOD, that was a huge part of it. that was a really main core of it. So I like that. I was like, if they're teaching this, then they're obviously like, starting to gear up those shifts. And yeah, slowly starting to see it, but it's going to take time. Anything, whenever there's new changes or trying to implement something new, it takes time, but it's happening. It's happening, which is good. So I also wanted to say, and I know this happened like a little while ago now, but congratulations on winning the Child Welfare Professional of the Year award. What does that mean for you?
Thank you so much. Honestly, it has been just such an honor. And when I think about it, it still makes me emotional because never in a million years did I think that I would win an award for Child Welfare Professional of the Year. You know what I mean? Like,
Amazing, though.
I'm the same mom who had her kids taken away and has been involved in the system multiple times. And then to be able to go and be selected to win this award and go in front of the same folks, right, that were involved in my case plan or made the legislation that led me to having the removal or whatever, to be able to go in front of them or even to be selected by them, right?
Yeah.
And to receive that award, I feel like is number one, such an honor. But number two, and I think this is very important, it's not just me, right? Like any parent is capable of achieving the same things that I've achieved and making the same changes that I've made with the right resources and the right supports and the right tools. Any parent is capable of this. And so I feel that it's an honor and a responsibility that I carry to help people change their perspectives on the way that they view parents and to reduce that stigma. Because what you see, like when they come into the system or when somebody gets incarcerated or, when you see them at their worst moment, like I want you to think about me because this is where they could be in a year or two from now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important too. And anyone with the right resources and support, as you say, can achieve anything. Like it's honestly, the sky's the limit, really. And I think we forget that we are the creators of our own world. There's so many different pathways that we can choose. There's always options around us. We are capable of so much more than we realize. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was really, really important. So can you describe a little bit more about like your role in supporting other parents who've lost custody of their children due to addiction or mental health challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, when a parent comes into the system, they come in for pretty much the same basic reasons, whether that be primarily substance use challenges, but also sometimes could be domestic violence. It could be like inadequate supervision, which typically is to do with substance use challenges. It could be mental health challenges. It could be just basically like the same things, right? Or lack of housing, lack of resources, poverty. So those are usually the things that cause a parent to come into the system. And typically speaking, after a parent has had their child removed, the very first thing that happens is they go to court, right? They go to court, the judge will review their case and determine whether there's probable cause. And that's where I meet a parent at for the first time. So when they show up at court, the judge introduces myself or another one of our parent partners to the parent. And she says to them, hey, this is a parent who's been through the system before and made it to the other side successfully. They're not here to give you legal advice. They're here for practical and emotional support. And then we exchange numbers and I call them afterwards. And I just share a little bit of my story. Like I'm not there obviously to talk all about me, but I do share a little bit with them to let them know that recovery is possible, reunification is possible, healing and hope are possible. And once we have kind of made a connection and built a little bit of trust, then I just support them, like whatever it is that they need, that they determine that they need, right? Because maybe they aren't ready to get sober. Maybe they're not ready to work their case plan. We don't know where a person is at when that happens because it's such a traumatic and shocking event that sometimes it takes people a little time before they want to engage, and maybe they don't ever, and that's okay too, but whatever it is that they choose, like I just support them in the path to finding their pathway, whatever that may be. And so the way that I do that is sometimes I may meet them for coffee, or we could take a walk together, or we could meet on Zoom and work on, their action plan or coming up with an action plan. We could talk on the phone or text message. Like I will meet them where they're at. However it is that they want support, I will give them that support. And then I also show up with them to their next court hearing or their next meeting about their case. Here they call it like a case planning conference or staffing, where it's kind of like a multidisciplinary team meeting. And then the other thing that we do is we educate parents about the system. So something that I went through when I was going through is I didn't know what was going on. Like I didn't know what the next thing to do was. I did know that I had to work these certain tasks, but I didn't know who to call or how to do it or what was going to happen next or when court was again. And so we teach a parent all of those things. So we essentially like prepare them for what they're going to encounter, and then we support them as they're walking through it.
That's awesome. That's so, so good. And I love that you also give them like, we call it intentional disclosure. So it's usually when, a peer worker is intentionally sharing part of their story to build that trust, as you say, and to make sure that they understand, that you do get it, like you've been there as well, and they can rely on you a little bit more. So I think that's so valuable as well, that you do share a little bit about your story with them. I was actually going to ask as well. So, what are some of the key resources or like support mechanisms that you provide to parents like immediately after their court hearings?
Wow. So, in the beginning, the biggest resource and support mechanism is listening. I mean, really, it's such a traumatic thing for that to happen. They're like scrambling. What's going to happen next? When do I get to see my kid again? When do I go to court? When do I talk to my case manager? Like they're just scrambling because there's this like little period of time where they go to court and then nothing happens for like a month. And so they are just in that trauma and shocked and so many emotions, And so I find that the best thing that I can do, especially in the beginning, is just to listen, just to be a sounding board, just to answer my phone or reach out and check in with them. And so that's really what we do in the beginning. And then I try to get the education in. So letting them know this is what's going to happen next. This is when to expect the next call. This is the next court hearing, like just to kind of let them know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So that we're being trauma informed, right? Because when people understand what's going to happen next, it doesn't feel quite as traumatic.
Yeah.
Because they can be prepared. They can prepare themselves mentally, emotionally to do the next thing. But as far as the resources go, as I was saying before when I was sharing my story, when I first had this happen to me, I didn't have nothing. Like I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place. Like I didn't have nothing. And oftentimes that's what happens when a parent comes into the system as well. A lot of times they come into the system because they're experiencing poverty. And so they may need to be connected to a housing resource. Not that there's lots of housing resources out there, because there's not. But maybe it's like an emergency shelter. Maybe it's a sober living house. Maybe it's a treatment center or a detox. So we just try to connect them to the immediate needs that they're facing. Maybe they just need some food or some clothes or, whatever it is that they need to kind of just get prepared to take the next steps to start working on their case plan. So we address like the immediate needs and then we just listen. But from there, then we start to use what we call like motivational interviewing. And I don't know if you know what that is, but so it's just a way of working with somebody to kind of get them to answer their own questions or make their own decisions or decide what's best for them. And sort of a way of just like asking questions and reflecting back what you've heard and, just kind of getting to the root of, do they want to do this or do they want to do that? Or and kind of weighing things out and allowing them to be in the driver's seat to make the best decisions for themselves and their families. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
And I think that's so good as well. Like it's, and as you say, like at the beginning, them going through so much, shock, it's a sense of urgency as well. Like, to try and get this sorted, and to be, a listening ear for them while they vent and they process that information and those emotions as well, I think is so important. And then I love that you mentioned, recognizing what their immediate needs are, because that's something that I also feel is missed sometimes. Like, it's like, do people, have a stable housing? Do people have any money? Like, have they eaten recently? Are they hydrated? Like, are they do they need any medical assistance as well? Like, how is their physical health as well? Do they have clean clothes? Like, just as you said, like, I think that's super, super important. And then obviously connecting them with the services that they need to meet those needs. If you can't provide it yourself, I think is so, so, so good.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say are some of the most like difficult aspects of your job, and how do you handle them? Like, do you find yourself getting triggered at all?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I first started at this job, I had done a lot of work on myself personally. But what I hadn't done is really take a hard look at the times through my own trauma with my kids. So I knew that it happened, right? Obviously, I knew that it happened. And I had done a lot of work to become a different person, but I hadn't really done like that shadow work, so to speak, And so what I had to do is I was confronted with things during my work that brought up feelings for me and brought up triggers, to no fault of anybody else, but it just brought up things that I hadn't really thought about before. And I probably would have never had to think about if I wasn't doing this line of work. But to see parents experiencing the same feelings that I was experiencing, and to see specific things that happen, right? Like, for example, a parent has shared with me that one of the hardest things for them is not being able to check on their kids at night. Like any parent, when you have a child, you want to make sure that they're safe. And when you are going through the system, you can't do that. Sometimes you don't even know where they are. You don't know who they're with. You don't know anything. And they do that intentionally so that they're keeping kids safe from you, right?
Yeah.
But that can drive somebody mad. And so that was one of the hardest things for me, was not being able to go open my son's door in the middle of the night, make sure he's sleeping in his bed, or make sure that he got on the school bus okay. Like, those are the things that drove me to insanity. And so what I had to do was I had to sign up for some trauma therapy, and I worked on trauma therapy. I did, I think they call it's like the eye movement thing.
EMDR.
Thank you. Yes. EMDR. Yes. I did that for about a year, and I worked on like some specific events that happened, because some of the things, like, for the most part, I mean, I am 100% on board that every parent should be reunified with their child. However, there are some things that happen that are egregious, meaning that there's some severe abuse or even death, or, really bad things happen. Not very often. It's very rare that I ever see anything like that. It's only happened a few times. But in the times that it's happened, like, I've had to do some work on myself to be able to get through that and still show up for the parent, right?
Yeah.
So it really took me, and still today, me having to work on myself. And was it over? Like, will I ever come to a place where that will be over? I don't think so. I think there's always going to be opportunities to continue working on myself. And there will be another thing that will bring up another memory or another trigger. And I believe, this is my theory, when things are revealed to me, I believe that it's my higher power's way of revealing it to me to tell me it's time to work on this. Like, putting it in front of me and saying, hey, guess what? You're ready. It's time to work on this. And so, I just take it as it comes. But again, that's why I love being at my agency, because we do peer support and we do it really well. So everybody else experiences similar feelings, and we have a large support network there. So I'm not like the only peer support worker, and I'm underneath like doctors or, therapists. Like, everybody is got a similar story to mine. And so I always have somebody to talk to and bounce things off of. And I'm not alone in the things that I experience. And in addition to that, we also have a clinical supervisor. So I meet with a licensed mental health therapist, aside from my trauma therapist that I do on my own personal time. But I meet with a licensed mental health therapist to talk about some of the things that we're going through and just kind of process them,
Yeah, and I think that's really, really important in any kind of community service work, is having a way to debrief and to process, those thoughts and those emotions with someone who's either like a supervisor or like another mental health professional, or like your colleagues as well. You can kind of mix it all up. I think that's really, really important, because, as you say, like, we are also, we're human. We are going to have reactions to things that, may not necessarily even be coming from a trauma of our own, which of course that can happen too, as you mentioned, but just also responding to some of the horrible things that you witness is completely natural, and you need to have someone to debrief and to process that through. So I'm so yeah, it makes me so happy to hear that you're still really focusing on your personal work, and that's still such a priority, as well as still having all that support within your organization as well. I just think that's so good that you're keeping on top of all of that. So do you think it's the right approach to be taking kids away from parents battling addiction? Like, what are your thoughts on the system currently in place? Because in Australia, the system likes to keep children with the parents as long as they're being like fed, bathed, and have clean clothes, like basic needs are met. We don't really have a very big foster system, like, at all. So they do everything they can to just keep people together. So what are your thoughts on that?
I love that. I'm so glad to hear that they actually do that. My thoughts is that the system needs its people in order to feed itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I believe that there's so much more that could be done to keep families together, and separating a parent from their child should be the absolute last resort,
Yes.
only in cases of egregious abuse. Like if somebody has sexually abused or severely physically abused their child, like, okay, I understand that.
Mm.
But right now, we're removing children from their parents because they're struggling with addiction, or they're struggling with a mental health challenge, or they were in a domestic violence relationship. And so they're going to take their kids away, like that's going to make it better. Or they can't pay their light bill or their rent. So let's take their children away. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole lot more that could be done in supporting people instead of separating them from their children. Like, and so what happens here, and I don't know if I should go down this rabbit hole, but I'll just give you a little bit of a preview. What happens here is the foster care system is huge. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times people will sign up to be foster parents because it costs a lot of money to adopt a child.
Yeah.
And so if they become a foster parent, they can actually get paid to foster a child who they likely will adopt. And so when they do adopt that child, they get paid for every month until that child turns 18 years old. What if we took that money, and instead of giving it to them on the back end after the child has been adopted, what if we poured it into the family on the front end, and we paid for their rent, or we paid for their utilities, or we kept them in home and let mom go to treatment so she could get some help? There's just so much that we could do that we choose not to do. And so that's why I made that comment about the system needs its people to feed itself. Like, in order for the system to function, it needs its people. And typically it's people who are experiencing low income, or there's a lot of racial disparities in the system as well. I mean, also in the criminal justice system too. And so it's a shame. It's really a shame. And so I love to hear that they're doing it differently in Australia. And I hope that my personal feelings is that if we can get enough of people like me on the inside, right, hopefully we can create some sort of change, even if we can't radically change it. Like, hopefully we can at least help families stay together and make some possibility of it being together more in the front end, with people like me sharing our experience. Because I'm going to tell you something, just one more thing, okay? And then I'll get off the soapbox. Okay. When my kids were separated from me in 2018, I wasn't even living in the home, right? Like,
Yes.
my probation officer reported me to Child Protective Services. They knew that I had failed a drug test at probation, and that is what led to the removal, because I was going around the place where my kids were, which was my mom's house. But there was a safe adult there. I was going to go to jail anyways. I did not need the system to save me, right? I mean, going to jail did save my life, but having my kids separated from me and navigating through that case plan, like, that was a lot. And I don't think that needed to happen. I don't think it should happen to anybody. Like, and this is what happens too. When a child gets removed and they get adopted, guess what happens to that child?
What
They
happens?
grow up to be a parent who then gets their child removed. And so it just perpetuates the
Yeah.
system over and over, or they wind up in prison because the outcomes for these children are not good. Like if you look up the statistics on it, it is not good. So I'll get off of that soapbox now, but I love to hear that they're doing it differently in Australia. And I think there's a shift to start doing it differently here because they're trying to intentionally work on prevention and diversion, but we've got such a long ways to go.
I mean, we do as well. Like even though, yeah, I think it's good that they are focusing on that. I like that you mentioned, taking that money that they pay foster parents to utilizing that for the family and to also provide like further treatment services or options to actually help rehabilitate them as well. But like, yeah, here I find there's not really much like intervention in the sense of like they won't help someone go get into rehab. It'll just be like, we'll kind of keep an eye on this, and then that's about it. That's about
Yeah.
it. And even with teenagers, particularly, I feel like our system really like lets them down because, I've seen cases where a mum's been severely mentally ill and has no capacity to take care of herself, let alone a child. And DCP, which is our Department of Child Protection, is they won't intervene on that. So you know what I mean? Like I'm like, I guess it's good, but it's also not working either because that child then
Right.
starts to suffer because I went to this one house where it was just filthy. Like this kid had no clean dishes, no clean clothes. Their hair was matted, like weren't going to school. So there's a lot more work to be done here as well. But yeah, I wish I could be more a part of like the policymakers, being able to get in front of them and to really start making some moves. But that's the long game for me anyway.
Me too, girl.
So actually that kind of leads into my next question. What changes would you like to see made by the policymakers going forward?
Well, I just want to comment on what you just said as far as you're right. Like there are some cases where a parent is just not in condition to take care of their child. And so as far as policy goes, I think that we need to sit down together and brainstorm, right? Like we need to have some critical conversations and do some critical thinking and think outside of the box and not just protect our liability and cover our own asses, right? Like we need to have some critical conversations about what can we do? How can we help families? We actually have an organization here in Florida, and I think they might be all over the United States, but I'm not positive, but it's called Better Together. And so what they do is they intervene before the system gets involved. So there is like, they go to like churches all over the place. Like every Sunday they're in a different church and they probably go other places too. I don't know. But, and they ask people, will you be a foster family? But it's not foster care. It's just kind of like a surrogate family. For a parent or that needs to get some help. So you take care of the child and your house is vetted. They do a background check. They give them training. Like they do all the same things that foster parents get, except for that it's preventative. So instead of taking the children away, they let the parents get the help that they need. And then after they get the help they need, they still continue to support them. So they give them resources. They're still a support person. Like they still do a lot of stuff. So we need more of that kind of thinking and more of that kind of support and less of what we're doing. So as far as policy goes, like right now we have these words like reasonable efforts and least intrusive and imminent danger, and all of these things like make it very subjective, right? So what I would like to see is something that is a little bit more concrete, that we cannot just take children away from their parents because somebody's struggling with substance use. Like it should be, if there is clear and present danger, right? Like this child is being harmed, then okay, we need to step in. But if it's probably going to happen, we need to figure out something different first. You know what I mean? So we have a long ways to go, but as far as one more thing about policy, like the people that have been through it, the people that like care to see something different, those are the people that need to be at the table. These damn governors and senators and House representatives, like I don't know how it works there, but we need to get people at the table that actually know what they're talking about. Not to say that they don't, but people that have actually lived through it. We need
Yes.
those people to be at the table.
Couldn't agree more. And that is something that I'm glad to say Australia is really starting to implement now. So we are getting really focused on having lived experience people come into committee meetings and actually putting their input into things. So even for other organizations as well who might be in community services, whatever area they're in, they can have like committee meetings where someone can become, like, I'm a certified lived experience representative. So I got trained to learn how to come into those meetings and actually give my input.
Is that specifically for policy?
Yeah, policy procedures. Yeah, basically.
Tell
Yeah.
me what that's called again.
So I'm a lived experience lived experience AOD representative.
I'm going to advocate for that. Thank you.
Yes, because I was talking to my other mate like in the US, and he said that that's not really a thing. So I was like, that needs to, so that's obviously a shift that needs to happen there. But we are starting to do that more here. Plus, I've become members of a lot of different organizations, and they send out like a lot of surveys. So if you are someone with lived experience, they will ask you all these questions. If you've accessed AOD services or mental health services or whatever services, and you can actually give them an insight into how your experience was, like as the consumer. So that I'm seeing a lot more of that. I actually had a survey come into my inbox today that they were like, can you please give your input into, how you experience, AOD services in WA? And I was like, sure, can do. But yeah, that's all a part of, creating those shifts. Like I like that Australia is really starting to wake up to this, but again, like it just takes time to change and like implement all this. But I love that the discussions are happening. Like I love that.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah. So I hope, US isn't too far behind with that, because I think it's really valuable, really, really valuable, as you say, to have, people with lived experience at the table having their input, because it's just so valuable. We have a completely different insight, and it's powerful. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. So going back to your journey to sobriety, how are you and your husband maintaining your sobriety these days? Now, I know you mentioned briefly you've got your own programs, but what are you doing?
Well, we do a lot of the same things, honestly. So I have like my women's meeting that I go to every Friday night. I mean, I'm there every Friday. He has a men's meeting that he goes to every Tuesday night. Like I have my support network of women. Like now that I've been in recovery for a few years, like I have what I call them my roots. If I'm the tree, they're my roots. Like they water me, they feed me, they weather me during the storms. Like that's what I mean by my roots. But I have like my people, right? And he has his people. And so we're just very well connected in our own communities. And for me, I feel like I've taken a little bit more of a holistic approach to recovery in the way that I've learned a lot more tools. And so I utilize other tools as well, not just necessarily in my recovery, but in my mental and physical well-being. And so I like to treat myself as a whole person, right? Not just as a recovering addict, So I work on my mental well-being, and I have a crisis plan. I go to the gym. I try to eat really healthy. I try to stay in touch with my spirituality, and so I try to treat all of the aspects of who I am as a woman and a person, and I still have that recovery component in there as well. And so a big part of that for me is giving back. I mean, what I do for work is giving back, but I get paid for that, right? So what I do personally is like I go to the jail. I go to the jail once a month, and the treatment center that I was in, I go there every Sunday, and that's a big part of my recovery journey. But I feel that it's very important that if you're going to give back, you need to be pouring in what you're pouring out. And so for
Yes.
me, that means equally pouring into myself what I'm pouring out, if not pouring in more to myself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you're not in a good place, like you can't be there for other people. And so I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that I'm okay. And that means that I've learned how to say no and I don't feel bad about it. You
Good.
know, I try to be good with my time management, but that's probably the one thing that I'm still struggling with, like I
Mm.
know where I'm going to be, but I overcommit to things. So
Yeah.
that's something that I deal with. But yeah, I mean, I'm just like a whole person, you know what I mean? So I got to deal with this whole thing that I got going on here.
And it's so true though. Like I like to say that to people as well. Like when you're trying to maintain your recovery, it's not like you're sitting there every day being like, don't do drugs, don't drink. Like,
Right.
that's not like that's not what it is. Like, it's looking at all those key areas. So I call them like the 5 pillars of wellness, which is like your emotional, your spiritual, your mental, your physical, and your social well-being. So really looking into those 5 pillars and making sure each of those areas are balanced, because if they're all balanced, you will be well. So that's something
That's
that,
right.
I like to focus on when I'm maintaining my sobriety as well. And just as well, ensuring I don't get too complacent. So there's been times as well that I've been really complacent and I stopped going to my drug counselor. I stopped seeing my psychologist because I was like, I don't need it. Might as well save some money. I'm good. Like, I'm good. Even though like I'm wearing a shirt today that says like even baddies get saddies.
I love that.
But like it's true. I still do get saddies, and so that's where I can sometimes fall backwards, and that's when I'm really vulnerable to like lapses. Is when I stop doing these things because I'm feeling
Yeah.
good in all these other areas. But yeah, you got to maintain the whole picture.
Yep.
Oh gosh. So, what are your goals for the future, both personally and professionally?
That's such a good question. So, everything that I ever set out to do when I first got clean, I've literally done everything. So, it's very hard for me to say like what I want to do. But if I had a magic wand and I could do whatever I wanted to do right now at this moment, I really, really want to start. Or buy, shall I say, I want to buy a big apartment building and I want to like open up a affordable housing program for families or for mothers and their children, because a need that we have here in my community is that, like a mom will go through treatment with her baby and then she has nowhere to go when she gets out, or a family wants to start their life together after being in addiction for so long and they have nowhere to go because housing is ridiculously expensive here. And
Mm.
so I would love to have like a little recovery community center where people, I guess maybe center is the wrong word, but like an apartment building where people could live and they could rent these apartment buildings with felony convictions or not so good credit or evictions. Like I had all those things, but I turned out to be a really great tenant who eventually went on to buy a house and has great credit now. So I know that people can change, but just being some type of like second chance housing provider, like
Yep.
that's what I really, really want to do. So we're just going to like put it out there that it's going to happen. I've been talking about this for a minute, so I don't know when, but I'm going to get rich and I'm going to make it happen.
I love that because I have a very similar goal actually in Australia, because we have a really bad housing crisis here, and we also don't have enough beds even for rehabs. Like there's just nowhere near enough. And so I was like, whether I could create like some more like either drop-in centers, so people who might be like sleeping rough, so who might be experiencing homelessness can drop in and like get whatever their immediate needs met, and maybe some respite. And then also like looking at the more like long-term effects as well. So like having, like another building or space for where people can stay as well, like who are experiencing those hardships and might even be in between, trying to get into a rehab, or, are coming out of the system and, are needing a fresh start, So yeah, I'm very much with you on that. Maybe we can have a chat about something at some point.
Yes.
Oh, that's so good. But yeah, such a good goal though. I love that. I think that's awesome. And yeah, it's such a beautiful one as well.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Well, to wrap it up, if there was a listener out there who's currently experiencing losing custody of their child, or maybe they haven't lost custody but are battling with addiction and have lost communication with their child, what would you say to them?
Gosh, that's such a tough one. So I'm going to answer this in two parts, okay? If you're somebody who has lost custody of your child, whether that be through the child welfare system or through family courts and like the other parent has custody of their child, I would just tell you like don't give up hope and don't ever stop trying no matter what you're facing, because I don't care if you have a 3-year-old, no matter what, one of these days, your child is going to want to know who their parent is and they're going to want to come find you. And you need to be able to show them that you never gave up. So, no matter what you're looking at, and I'm not saying that it might be 15 years, but no matter what you're looking at, like, don't give up, because we need our kids to know that we kept fighting and we never gave up on them. And don't give up on yourself either, because believe it or not, like it may seem like insurmountable amount of time or the tallest mountain to climb. But if you just take it one step at a time and find somebody to help support you along the way, you would be so surprised at what you can accomplish. I can tell you that when I look back at myself on where I was 6 years ago, I had literally nothing, like literally nothing. And I never thought that life would be any different, but it is today. And I would have never found this if I would have given up on myself. And so I just encourage you to not give up on yourself and to not give up on your dream, even if you can't see what that looks like now. And then the second part of that is that if you haven't had any communication with your child, I would just encourage you to like start writing them, like start making a journal, writing a journal of how you're feeling and what you're going through and like those thoughts, because one day I believe that miracle is going to happen for you. And I believe that you're going to reconnect with your child. And how cool would it be if when that day comes, you're able to hand them a journal and say, look, I never forgot about you. I was always thinking about you. How healing would that be? And so I just encourage you, no matter where you're at, if you're lost in addiction right now and you don't know that there's a way out, just believe that I believe in you and believe that hope is possible, and try to find somebody who has been through it before and made it to the other side, because they know the way out. And I'm sure that either they will help you through or they will point you to the right resource.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Sonya. I was like tearing over here. Thank you so much, though, for coming on. This has been such a good yarn. I really, really appreciate it. And such important topics too.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad this worked out tonight.
I know. We got it sorted. Thank you, COVID.
I know.
Oh, well, all right. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'll speak to you soon.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good night or good day.
Yeah, good day. You a good night.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.